long-running series of my talking about the top stories in Japan's pop culture for a given week. And this week is January 25th, and there's been a lot of really interesting stuff going on that I wanted to talk about. Some of the things are kind of lighthearted, some are a little bit heavy, but it's all really great stuff. And so I hope you will find it as interesting as I did. Let's start with the simple headlines, so to speak. This week, Sony announced that they are going to be stopping production of mini discs and recordable Blu-ray discs. Uh, this is pretty interesting because I wasn't even aware that mini discs were still being produced. If you're of a certain age, you will remember the mini disc. It came out in the late 90s. And back at the time, it was a really high-tech sort of thing. It was an optical disc inside like a little square cartridge. And it was a lot easier to handle than compact discs, which were the kind of standard at the time. And they were a lot of fun. You could skip around. You could, make mixes. You could play randomly on them. And so they were kind of a precursor to the way that we listen to music today. But I like to think of them they're kind of like Sony's last hurrah as a digital, as a media, as a maker of media, like physical media. I really loved mini discs. They were portable. They were much easier to share, like friends making mixes on them. I even had like a standalone mini disc player. And I'm fascinated to know that Sony was still manufacturing them this time along. This many years afterwards. It's got to be at least 25 years since they started making them. And now, especially if you're a younger person, you might not be aware of just how much of a force Sony was in manufacturing of consumer audio equipment back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. I mean, they basically made consumer audio something sexy and cool looking. Their miniaturized television sets in the 60s, their portable radios in the late 60s and early 70s. Sony's transistor radio was the first really popular one. Even though Americans invented the transistor, Japan and Sony in particular really exploited it to make something that consumers really wanted. And then, in the cassette tapes, the plastic cassette tape with the two little holes, you had to wind it back with a pencil. If I'm really aging myself, if your tape deck wasn't rewinding, that was invented in Europe, but it was Sony who popularized it as a format. And Sony was this like just monster of taking new formats and popularizing them throughout the world. Mini disc, they invented the compact discs spread across humanity and across the world was due to them. And the mini disc was their last attempt to make a piece of physical media for audiophiles and for audio listeners everywhere. And it didn't go that well. By that point, people had pretty much entrenched with CD, and we were on the cusp of digital audio listening. This is around the time, it was only a few years after minidisc came out, that Napster came out. You might remember that. Napster, which was an illegal file sharing service. Now we kind of take this thing for granted, but the ability to share music over the internet was like really just kind of mind-blowing at the time, and being able to share your playlists and stuff and things like that. So, streaming killed the physical media star. I'm kind of sad about this because I love Sony's physical technologies. Now you basically, the only physical like piece of hardware most people associate with Sony is the PlayStation, which is, hugely successful. It's a big deal. It's big for gaming. But again, when I was growing up, you thought of Sony as an AV company, audio, video, televisions, like Trinitrons were the standard. They don't really make those anymore, not at all. And audio gear. Sony's Akio Morita, who was the chairman in the 80s, was just a huge audiophile, and Norio Oga, who was the actual CEO of Sony in the 1980s, he was CEO when the Walkman came out, was just a huge audiophile. He was actually a symphony orchestra constructor, Norio Oga. So like you had this huge audio kind of love at Sony, and that's what drove the creation of all of these amazing formats. And the mini disc was really cool. It was really compact. It was mini. And I'm kind of sad to see it go, even though honestly, I haven't listened to a mini disc in probably more than 20 years. It's crazy how much time goes by. That's just, and how quickly when you grow up, when you become an adult, 20 years just goes by in the blink of an eye. I'm kind of dating myself here, but I will definitely miss it. And they're also discontinuing Blu-ray, recordable Blu-ray discs. Now, this doesn't mean that Blu-ray is out or done or anything like that. I think pre-recorded Blu-ray discs are still going to be a thing, but Sony has announced they are no longer going to be manufacturing the recordable ones. So this is really the end of an era. It's the end of an era of a kingpin, a titan of physical media manufacturers. Sony getting out of these industries is, I mean, we knew that we had switched definitively from the physical media to the digital media era quite some time ago. But you know, when you hear something like this, it's a little bit of a shocker. So then to recap, Sony is ceasing production of mini discs, ceasing production of recordable Blu-ray discs. End of an era. Sad to see them go. So that's news point number one. Let's go into news point number two. That is that there is a digitally remastered version of a classic Japanese animated movie that is going to be out in theaters for only one day, tomorrow, January 25th. What is Saturday? Anyway, that movie is called Macross the Movie, Do You Remember Love? And it came out in 1984. Now, this is a big deal for a couple of reasons. Macross is generally a big deal because it was translated into English it was translated into English as Robotech, one part of the Robotech trilogy, which aired in America starting around 1985, and was one of the first, not the first, but one of the first big narrative style anime series to really take off among American kids. Before that, there had been Space Cruiser Yamato, Star Blazers, which also had an episodic narrative going through the entire series. But most cartoons in America broadcast at that time were not narrative. They were just individual episodes. And Robotech, hi Fifth Dream. Yes, Robotech changed my life in a big way too when I was a kid. I must have been 85. I was probably 12 when it came out, and it was really mind-blowing. I loved the series because it had great design work and it had great sci-fi storytelling. I didn't understand that it was actually a parody. It came out, it was conceived as a parody of shows like Space Cruiser Yamato and a whole lot of other Japanese science fiction. But the real reason why Macross / Robotech is so important is not just because it was a great show or a hit show. It was the first animated series that was made by anime nerds for anime nerds. So to set the stage here, until Macross came out, anime was made by professional craftspeople, professional animators, who of course they loved the medium of animation, but they weren't anime otaku. They weren't fans of anime. They were working to make this stuff. Macross coming out in 1982 in Japan marked the graduation, or the maturation, I think you can say, the maturation of the generation of Japanese kids who had been raised on anime since birth. The very first cartoon to be called an anime in Japan is Astro Boy, which aired in New Year's Day of 1963. And that was the first domestically Japanese produced full-length anime TV series. There had been anime movies before that. They weren't called anime back then. They were called manga eiga, manga movies. The term anime didn't really start taking off until the late 60s, early 70s, and especially in the late 70s when shows like Star Blazers and then Macross in the early 80s started to take off. So Macross was the first series made by kids who were still very young when they were most of the team, most of the crew were in their early 20s when they're working on this. They loved anime. They were raised on anime. They participated in all sorts of anime conventions and things like that. And they made this basically for themselves and people like themselves, which is to say, anime otaku. Macross is also really famous because it is the first Japanese anime to actually use the word otaku. It's not using it in terms of an anime freak or a nerd or a geek or anything like that. It's using it in the actual way in which otaku is used as a grammatical a word in Japanese, which is a really polite way of saying you. But it was dropped into the series as a kind of in-joke by a bunch of people who very much knew that otaku was rapidly turning from this form of like rarefied address into a way of calling people who are obsessed with cartoons, even as adults. And Macross was a huge hit, a genre-defining, society-wide hit in Japan. And it really redefined what anime was. Until that point, anime had been like largely made for either kids or sometimes it was cut into more theatrical things that were aimed at older audiences, both Yamato and Gundam, which came out in the theaters in 1981, a little bit after that, were the kind of first inklings that anime was starting to be watched by people outside of the traditional demographics of kids in Japan. Macross was like the coming out. It was huge among teenagers and young adults. The product, the merchandising that was sold for it was all aimed at what is in Japan called high target, older audiences. Things like the Macross Valkyries, a transforming robot that would turn into like what looked kind of like an F-14 fighter. Toys made by a company called Takatoku were packaged in these really elaborate, really beautifully finished boxes. The toys were kind of fragile. They were obviously not made for kids to pound around on. They were made for discriminating older fans, such as myself. I mean, I was obsessed with Takatoku's Macross toys as a kid. I still am today. One of these days, I'm going to do a live stream focusing on my Takatoku toys because they are a really fascinating company that was active in the 70s and 80s in Japan and helped fund a lot of really classic animation shows and made a lot of really classic toys. But Macross. So Macross, I've set the stage here, is this really big, as Japanese would say, epoch-making anime franchise from the 1980s, and it's continued to today. In 1984, the Macross animated television series that had started in 1982 had proved popular enough that they made a theatrical version of it. And instead of just reusing the footage from the TV series, which was quite rough in a lot of places, these kids were just getting up to speed on how to become animators. And so the Macross TV series is notoriously uneven in terms of quality from even from scene to scene in certain episodes. Macross the Movie was reanimated from the ground up as its own standalone story from lessons they had learned making the series. It was helmed by a guy named Shoji Kawamori, together with the grown-up in the room, a guy named Noboru Ishiguro, who was one of those kind of craftspeople I was talking about before, who is sort of guiding these young people into becoming full-fledged animators. And a lot of like really just hugely talented people worked on that movie. Anno Hideaki, later known for Evangelion and many other things, worked on Macross the Movie. Macross the Movie was absolutely stunning. Like it still stands up as one of the premier examples of hand-drawn cell animation ever made, I think. The story is a little bit janky, to be brutally honest, but the visuals, oh man, the visuals are so good. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend checking it out. You can see there are portions of it in high definition on YouTube. You can look up Macross the Movie 1984, or it's called Macross Do You Remember Love? If you look up those terms, I'm sure you can find it. It does hold up. I think. You don't necessarily need to have seen the Macross TV series, but if you have, like, it's really interesting to see all of these characters and situations in like high definition. Like the jump in quality from the TV series to the movie was really quite amazing. And honestly, Macross the Movie is one of the big reasons that I just decided I needed to come to Japan. I needed to like learn more about this culture, more about these people who made this just a really incredible movie. I didn't understand Japanese that well at the time, and I remember once I did master Japanese well enough to understand it, I actually do find the movie kind of a little bit story-wise, it's not great, I don't think. Visually, absolutely amazing. And a pinnacle of, again, hand-drawn animation. No computers involved in this. The only, I think, film that might best it is Akira, which came out 5 years later in 1989. Akira is probably the premier hand-drawn cell animated movie that I've ever seen. That's another story for another time. Just absolutely beautiful film. But Macross is up there. It's if it's not the top, it's in the top three. Recently, Macross the Movie was remastered and recolored, I hear. We'll get into that in a second. And it is being shown for one day only in theaters tomorrow in Tokyo and other places in Japan, actually. I think it's being shown in major cities in Japan. I'm hoping to check it out. I have actually I've seen that movie. If you told me I've seen Macross the Movie 100 times, I would believe you. I've seen it so many times, but I've never seen it in the theater. So I'm really curious to check this out. But there's a couple things about this. One is that it's been remastered and it's being digitally projected. It's not going to be on film, which is kind of a bummer. My buddy Patrick Macias, who I do the Tokyoscope, the Pure Tokyoscope podcast with, he is a huge anti-digital projection guy. I am too. I understand why. I want to see this on film. It's not on film. The other issue is that they've used AI to digitally rebalance the colors. I've seen some side-by-side footage and it's really subtle, but like I get a little bit nervous when I hear about AI being applied to things I really love from the past, like Macross the Movie. If I go see it tomorrow, I will let you know how it was. I'm sure Patrick and I are going to be talking about it on the Pure Tokyoscope podcast one of these days. But it's big news. Macross was a huge part of the reason why I became interested in Japan as a kid. It is a massively influential anime series in general, not only in Japan, but elsewhere. The director of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse has cited Macross and Macross the Movie as being what made him get into animation. And look at the amazing Spider-Man animated film that he made. So you have this incredibly influential film back in Japanese theaters for one day. It's amazing pop cultural sort of confluence. I think it's great stuff. So now we're on to the third topic, and it's a little bit heavier, but I don't want to, freak you out or anything. It is about the presidential inauguration and the inauguration of a new American president and how he and his policies may affect Japanese pop culture going forward. This is really on my mind because I was asked recently to give a talk about this to a Japanese business organization earlier this week. And there's a lot of concern here among Japanese business people and Japanese investors about what is going to happen to Japanese pop cultural products over the next 4 years. And it might seem like an overblown question, but when you look at some of the policy positions that the Trump administration has taken, there is certainly cause for concern. The first one is a kind of logistical structural one, and that is you've probably heard that Trump is planning on levying tariffs on all sorts of foreign imports. The biggest ones are going to be levied on China. And that is an issue for fans of Japanese pop culture. Why? Well, because so much of the manga that is published and consumed in America is actually printed in China. And those, even though they're Japanese content, they're going to be imported from Chinese publishers and thus subject to the tariff. There was an article in the Comics Journal earlier this week where representatives from companies like Square Enix manga have said that they're almost certainly going to have to raise their prices on printed copies of manga to compensate for the tariffs. This is what tariffs do. There was some kind of confusion, I think, among a lot of people that tariffs punish the foreign countries. They actually punish American consumers because the companies who have to charge more for their products pass those prices along to customers. And we are almost certainly going to see a bump in prices of physical manga. Now, you might think that, yes, and Canada, Mexico, many countries are being hit with this, but right now I'm focusing on with tariffs. But right now I'm focusing on how that might affect Japanese pop culture in specific. How it's going to affect other countries, there's definitely going to be effects. But right now, let's just kind of drill this down to Japanese pop culture. You're going to be paying more for manga. And you might say, well, okay, who cares? Aren't there digital platforms? Shueisha has like Manga Plus and all of these things. And those do exist. However, in my research and in my conversations with major Japanese publishers here, it seems that American manga readers overwhelmingly prefer physical copies of their manga. They do read them streaming on platforms, but they prefer to read them on paper. This is interesting because in Japan, the split now is 70% digital distribution versus 30% paper distribution. So streaming, digital distribution of manga is arguably bigger in Japan than it is in the West. But paper is still a very big thing. In Japan, manga tankobon and also the weekly comics are quite cheap because Japan has a huge domestic printing industry. So you don't have to ship things on containers from like another continent. You can just print it in another state, prefecture as they're called in Japan, and just truck it to where it needs to go. As a result, like, Shonen Jump is only like, 400 or 500 yen or something like that. Tankobon are only like in the 500 to 600 yen range. We're talking like $4, $5. Whereas in America, tankobon compilations of manga are already in the $10 range, and they're going to be going higher. So that is kind of a sad thing. It's going to be kind of put a little bit of a damper, I think, on manga fans' lives. As to why why Americans in particular like paper so much, I think, when I was a kid and a huge anime and manga fan, I loved to own avatars of the things that I was fans of, like Macross. I like to collect the Macross toys, Gundam. I like the Gundam models or the anime cell books or what have you. I think in anime and manga fandom in particular, there is a drive, a desire to own something physical from what you like, because the experience of watching anime, it's great, it's fun, but you're kind of removed from it. It's this. You experience it and then it's done. So if you want to kind of hold on to the things that you love, you need something physical, and tankobon compilations of manga are definitely one way to do that, the collectability aspect. I personally, I actually use the Manga Plus platform. It's great when you want to just kind of quickly zoom through issues of a new manga or a series that I want to get up to speed on. But, for the reading experience, I really prefer paper. So it's kind of sad to hear that the copies are going to be going up in price. It's not really a big deal for somebody like me who's like established. I have a job, but a lot of manga fans are young. A lot of manga fans don't have a huge amount of disposable income. And given that the price of things played a huge role in the elections last year, I think that when a policy causes the price of something they love to go up, that it's definitely cause for comment and concern. Another bigger kind of picture issue that I'm getting a little bit worried about is that the Trump administration is openly hostile to all forms of diversity. This isn't some kind of opinion of mine. They've stated it. And many of the policies that Trump proposed with his executive orders were deliberately aimed at curtailing diversity and curtailing discussion of gender and curtailing discussions of all sorts of things like that. And manga in particular is it's naturally diverse. Japan as a culture could be framed as conservative. There's a saying, the nail that sticks up is hammered down. That's a really famous saying in Japan. It's a very conservative culture in a lot of ways. However, that is absolutely not true about manga. Manga is like the safety valve for Japanese culture. It is a place where outsiders, where minorities, where iconoclasts, anti-authoritarian, nonconformists are able to kind of let their imaginations run wild. And those imaginations, the fantasies they create, are often things that are very tweaking the social order, even antisocial. Because of this, manga has often been targeted by the authorities in Japan. It might surprise you to hear this, but there have been a lot of kind of morality campaigns directed against manga and manga artists, starting as far back as the 60s. when student protesters were reading. Leftist student protesters were basically fueled by manga in the same way that American student protesters were fueled by like folk music and rock music and things like that. In Japan, it was manga that fueled the protest movements of the 60s. In the 70s, PTAs, parent-teacher associations, launched big campaigns against manga, and very specific manga artists made their lives hell because they thought that these comics were immoral. We have seen similar moral panics about manga almost every decade. Most recently, a little bit over a decade ago, the governor of Tokyo tried to pass this law that would keep manga that he thought were immoral out of the hands of, keep them off of the shelves of like newsstands and out of convenience stores and things like that. So manga have always had this kind of protest running through their blood, this kind of anti-establishment thing running through their blood. And they're filled with characters that are playing with concepts like gender and race and things like that. There are male characters who act female. There are female characters who act male. There's all sorts of things that you don't see so widely in Japanese society at large, and that introduce Japanese people to new ways of looking at the world. And this is precisely why they've come under fire from Japanese authorities over the years. Now, in America, we are shifting toward this more conservative mindset where things that are seen as quote unquote DEI or promoting of diversity are seen as bad. And it is very easy for me to imagine situations where authorities start to target manga and anime as well. We're already seeing this. Last year, several school districts in the American South, Tennessee, Florida, banned manga from school libraries for a variety of reasons, mainly centering around moral issues and things like that. Until now, that could have been dismissed as something kind of like, oh, well, that's the Deep South, things are more conservative there. Well, America, I don't know if America as a whole has shifted conservative, but the American government certainly has. The American authorities have completely shifted that way with the incoming Trump administration. So it's very easy for me to see things like manga and anime coming under increased official scrutiny because of the sorts of themes and the sorts of diversity that they promote. Now, even beyond that, the current administration is also showing a lot of hostility towards things that are foreign in general. The White House issued a statement saying that they want to rename the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. They want to rename the mountain known as Denali, which is a Native American word in Alaska, Mount McKinley. And they've taken Spanish language translations off of the White House website. This is a administration that is very hostile to things that are foreign. Manga and anime are foreign. They are. There's just no getting around it. And a administration that is freaked out by even calling something Mexico or having, foreign language verbiage on their website. So many manga use Japanese Jujutsu Kaisen. I mean, there's so many different manga it's not only diverse in terms of the characters and the themes, it's diverse linguistically. There's a lot of people out there who've gotten interested in learning the Japanese language from manga and anime and things like that. So it's definitely, I think of America as a melting pot, a very multicultural place. And the fact that manga has taken off so much in the States, especially among young people, is a source of great pride to me. I think we are a very open-minded people as a people. I think we are very open to different cultures and experiences. And when I went to Anime NYC last year in August, which I wrote about on my newsletter, I believe I talked about here as well on my channel, I was just struck by the diversity of the crowd there. All sorts of races, all genders, LGBTQ, people with physical handicaps, all sorts of people there. Amazing, amazing stuff. Everybody coming together with this shared love for things Japanese and things from Japan, Japanese fantasies. And it gave me actually a lot of hope about the future because, manga and anime are a grassroots phenomenon. They come from fans. That is what makes them popular. Even things like Shonen Jump magazine, which is a really, really big, it's probably one of the biggest comic magazines out there. It's run by a huge company called Shueisha. I have talked to their editors many, many times, and I again and again I hear, we can market this stuff, but it's the fans who make things popular. We can't force something on people. They have to come together and make Jujutsu Kaisen, Kagurabachi, My Hero Academia, Dan Da Dan, whatever it is, whatever the next big thing is, it's the young people, the fans who make it popular. So anime and manga are very much a grassroots sort of movement. No amount of the authorities telling people that it's bad will actually make people move away from it, but it could make life difficult for people who are fans of it, especially if they embrace things like diversity. So we are sailing into some kind of uncharted waters here. And the decisions that the Trump administration is going to be making over the next months and years are things I'm going to be watching very carefully with an eye on how they affect Japan and Japanese pop culture specifically, because that is my field. That is the field where I feel comfortable giving you my opinions about, because it's based in many, many years of experience and many, many years of working in the game, manga, anime industries, toy industries, and things like that. So I want to keep sharing with you these opinions. I don't want to freak you out. These are things that you need to be concerned about. It's things all of us need to look at, and not just Trump supporters or people who aren't Trump supporters. All of us, because we're all in this together. We're all Americans, and we love Japanese pop culture. I'm an American. I will remain an American. I live in Japan, but I am, I would never abandon my roots or who I am. I love being an American who loves Japanese pop culture. It's core to my identity, and it's core to the way that I made my way in this world, the way that I came up, and the way that I learned Japanese and all of that kind of stuff. So this is something I'm going to be watching very closely. Thank you for listening. Any questions? I can hang out for another few minutes if there's anything anybody wants to ask me about specifically. I love doing these interactive talks with you, because the things that you say and the things that you ask me always send me in new and interesting directions. So, it's cool. Shikataganai 100. You're living in Shinjuku. That's a cool place to live. Shinjuku, man, Shinjuku, Shibuya, they're changing rapidly these days, aren't they? So much construction and stuff going around there. What did I have for breakfast, lunch, or dinner? Oh, I'm going out for lunch soon. I haven't had lunch yet. In Tokyo, it's only, what time is it? A little bit before 11 o'clock. I had toast for breakfast. Not like an anime person with the toast in my mouth while I'm running, just toast normally, and coffee. I'm a big coffee drinker. I love coffee, and there's a lot of really great roasters here in Tokyo producing all sorts of hand-roasted beans and things like that. So is there anything people who want to further DEI can do in this Japanese cultural space? It's interesting because Japanese creators don't think of DEI when they're making their things. They don't think of cultural inclusion. They are making things for their own culture. They're making things for their own people. And we as foreign consumers are secondary. So I think it's important to remember that not all art is made for you or me. Like Macross the Movie wasn't made for Matt Alt. It was made for Japanese otaku. I happen to like it. I love it. It really resonated with me, and that's true for a lot of content. But I don't actually think that the content of Japan is going to be affected by any Trump policies, because Japanese creators don't create things for America specifically. And in fact, whenever they do, it inevitably kind of fails, like terribly, because Japanese people are Japan. They're in Japan making things for the Japanese market. They will continue making things for the Japanese market. It will continue to be as diverse as it's always been. If anything, I think Japanese anime and manga are getting more diverse. When I see things like Dan Da Dan, which I'm really into right now, it's a great Jump series. It's an animation. You have this perfect balance between the male and the female characters. There's no women being rescued by guys or women rescuing the dudes. Everybody's kind of in it together as equals. And I think you're going to be seeing a lot more of that going forward. So in the States, just keep consuming what you like and standing up for it and saying it when you see something that you disagree with. I think that's really important. Not being quiet when you see people making comments that you disagree with, or that you see authority figures making decisions that you disagree with. America has always had an anti-authoritarian streak, and we should be proud that we are able to speak up and speak truth to power in many ways. So what do I think of the mega rock band Band Maid? Okay. There's a shift. There's a tone shift. I actually don't know Band Maid. I know, oh, what is the other god? The Baby Metal. I love Baby Metal. But I don't know Band Maid. But now that you've asked me, I will definitely check it out. So, what anime made was specifically to try to get Americans' attention. Well, there's a lot of stuff coming out on Netflix that was funded by Netflix, and Japanese are thinking about the Western audience when they make it. But I'm thinking of things like there is a G Savior. It's like a kind of Gundam live-action CG series that was made in Australia, I believe, to try to get foreign Gundam fans in. It didn't work very well. There are things like Space Dandy that was made by Watanabe Kantoku, who was a genius. He's a great director, but Space Dandy, I think, was made with the Western audience in mind. It didn't find the audience that it was looking for. Somebody just brought up the new Gundam series GQXX. I don't even know how to pronounce it. Based on a story by Anno Hideaki. It's in the theaters in Japan right now. It's a very different take on Gundam. I'm planning on going and checking it out in the theater when I get a chance. I'll definitely report on it here. But I just find it really interesting because so many of these genres and series that were made for Japanese people, things like the isekai stuff, where you're kind of reborn in a different world, where you're kind of a loser in this world, you're reborn in another one, and suddenly everybody understands your value. It's very easy to understand why these things take off among people who are very frustrated with their societies in Japan or in America. Isekai in English is now like a search term on Netflix. If you type in isekai, it'll bring up all sorts of things. So it's obviously tapping into some kind of need that we're feeling in the West, as well as being originally made for Japanese people. So actually, you know what the first is? John Carter and isekai. That's actually a really good question. Do you know, some people say the very first isekai is Mark Twain. He did A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, which is a story about a guy, this kind of like layabout dude who takes a nap under a tree and wakes up and he's suddenly in King Arthur's time with like he's living in what would Mark Twain's world, but he's transported back in time to King Arthur's, like Arthurian legends and stuff like that. So that's kind of an isekai. Oh, I missed that question about Anno. What was that again? Ask that one again. What is Anno? Anno is he did the like basic story plot for the new Gundam thing. I don't think he's directing it or anything like that, but it'll be interesting to see this kind of Studio Kara with Nippon Sunrise. What are they called now? Just Sunrise. I think they're called like Bandai Namco Production Studios or something like that. But yes, Hideaki Anno did do a Godzilla remake and an Ultraman remake and a Kamen Rider remake. Hideaki Anno is now basically a live action director, and great. He's doing some really, really fun stuff. Shin Gojira is amazing. Shin Ultraman is amazing. Shin Kamen Rider, maybe less amazing, but still very much worth seeing. So it's all great stuff. Anyway, as I was saying, I plan to do these talks every week around this time, and I want to be... Yes, Anno is doing a new Yamato film. That actually is something I forgot to mention. Thank you for reminding me of that. So that's going to be, people are really interested to see how that turns out. I have to run, but I want to keep doing this every week. I love interacting with you guys. I love bringing like kind of the latest of Japanese pop culture developments to you. And I will be back, same channel, same rough time, probably. This is like, I'm aiming for like the 10 a.m. Japan time frame, 10 to 11 a.m., which is like 8 p.m. EST. And yeah, I will be seeing you guys soon. Stay tuned. Check in with the comments. I'm going to be putting links to some of the writing I've been doing on these topics. I did a big write-up on how American policies might affect Japanese pop culture going forward for my newsletter, which is blog.pureinventionbook.com. I will put that link in the description below or into a comment. どういたしまして、ありがとうございました. Thank you so much for coming, and I very much look forward to talking to you again next week. Stay in touch. Bye.